All right. Well, hello. Okay, welcome everyone to part 2 of our 3-week jaunt into Death Night. I hope everyone had a great Pesach and maybe 2 Seders and maybe just 1. And so here we go. Are you ready? So good news, bad news. Good news is we had so much left over from last week that it's going to be at the beginning of this week. I will catch up eventually. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I need a support group. All right, we all remember this. We are going to focus on, in the beginning part, about the mourning rituals. These are the rituals that are attached to someone who dies. And again, remember the ground rule, I speak direct. If something is confusing, either raise your hand and I'll answer the question right away, or I'll just tell you, give me a couple minutes, and we'll go from there. I just want to make sure you understand. We're going to look at a couple of texts tonight, specifically, just a fair warning, that are maybe sound harsh because they have to do with this concept of judgment. And judgment is very, very connected to, and I hope some of you watched Defending Your Life, but that was your homework assignment. Very directly involved with where we go after we die, or where our soul goes, I should say, after we die. So remember, our soul is our essence. It is not our body. It is the hard drive of our existence, to use that terminology. So we're going to look a little bit about, first, what happens when we die vis-a-vis the rituals. The first part of the rituals has to do with grief and mourning and us and how we observe our grief and mourning. And then it transitions in a way to the soul of the person who's no longer alive and kind of where they go and what that system is all about, theologically speaking, spiritually speaking. When I say system, we know the physical and the biological stuff. Okay, there are several things I wanted to just point out. There's probably more than this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to point these out. And for some of these ideas, I'm going to use, instead of the Reform Rabbi's Manual, I'm going to use Hamadrich, which is the Orthodox Rabbi's Manual. And for anyone who wants the slides or you want more information on the sources, please let me know via email, and I'm happy to send you both the deck from last week and from this week and from next week. And I think tonight, Stephanie is, thank you, Stephanie, for being here, is putting up the deck in the background. We're very savvy, in the background of what you'll see on YouTube, on the YouTube page. So last week's is up on the YouTube page, and this week's will be too. And then Stephanie will intermingle some of the slides. But if you just want the slide deck, by all means, let me know. So we'll read a little bit from here. Okay, someone dies. We ended last week with the confessional, with the vidui. Now someone has died. Okay. First thing that someone's supposed to say to you, or upon the death of someone, is a prayer called Dayan HaEmet. Dayan HaEmet, loosely translated, is praising God, the judge, Dayan HaEmet, of truth, capital T, big truth. And we're going to talk a little bit, break down what truth means vis-a-vis God and judgment and all that in just a second. But the first thing we say is the Dayan HaEmet prayer with the body there. If we don't have an opportunity to say that, we actually say that to the mourners. We can say Dayan HaEmet. You just say Dayan HaEmet, and they know, or they should know what that means. There's another thing that we can say, which in sort of our modern wording, we will say something like, may they rest in peace. There's actually a Hebrew equivalent of that as well. You can say, may their soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. You can also say to someone, may you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And you can say that from the immediate death of a person. There's no waiting period for that. Now, you've all heard, probably, and if not, I'll tell you, we are quick to it. We are Johnny on the spot when it comes to the funeral. Why? There are probably 100 reasons you've been taught, and there's no real dogma. The dogma is to do burial as quickly as possible by the second sunset. So it's dusk now, so it sort of counts as tomorrow. So if someone, God forbid, were to die right now, it's Tuesday, you would have to do the funeral by Thursday sunset. If it was an hour ago, you'd have to do it by tomorrow sunset. 2 sunsets you get. More or less 48 hours. Most people, because people are coming in from out of town and so on and so forth, will move that date or delay it a couple of days, which is fine. If you're going to delay it weeks, my advice to people is if they can't get here for the funeral, that's on them. In other words, don't delay because someone who chose to live on a different continent can't get a flight, right? We don't delay for this. You can delay for everything other than a funeral and a bris. The bris has to be on the 8th day, unless, what are the exceptions? Well, one exception, obviously, for this is, travel, and we want to take that into consideration. But the main exception is Jewish holidays and Shabbat. We get into and I'm not going to go through all of it tonight, but we're in one of those periods now where if someone were to die, the celebration of a Yom Tov or Yontiv actually trumps the grieving process. And what do I mean by that? The rabbis have and this is a moral choice that they're making when they write these rules. It's not just some, tradition. Like we answer most answers to Jewish questions, tradition. It's actually pragmatic. The community and the celebration of a holiday always comes first. It doesn't mean that you're not mourning and sad and all that stuff. You are obligated not to be in specific, and we'll talk about this in a second, specific periods of mourning when a holiday comes. So God forbid, again, someone dies today, they're buried by Thursday at sunset. Yontif begins on Friday evening this year. That's it, Shiva's over. Your actual period of Shiva is over because the holiday trumps the loss. Well, I'm not going to say more than that. You can actually, that is very easy to look up and find sources and understand. But it's the moral of the story is the community celebration and joy comes first before the individual. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. So someone dies, you are in a state, and we're going to talk about status a lot. The rabbis created categories and statuses to help us organize our mindset, if you will. When can I and when can I not do X, Y, or Z because of a funeral of a loved one? So first you're in the status of aninut. Aninut, it shows you right here, means shock. Someone has just died. The rabbis know that our bodies, minds, and spirits go into fight or flight. They didn't call it that, but they knew that there are 2 basic responses to the death of a loved one. Number 1 is fight, and that's a lot of anger that comes out immediately and a lot of stress and de-stress. Or flight. I have seen people gone into the home with the person lying there dead and they're cracking jokes. That's flight. Right there, I want nothing to do with this, and so emotionally, and it's your brain. It's not even something that you necessarily can control. Believe me, I know about controlling what my brain does, or not. So the point is that shock is the rabbi's way of saying, fine, you should be in shock, and do whatever you're going to do as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. In other words, if you're laughing and trying to live in denial, fine. Or not trying to, you're in denial, fine. If you're literally in the corner, in the fetal position crying, fine. Shock is shock. And if you are an aninut, you are actually, that's when the community sort of takes over. And we know this naturally when someone dies. What can I bake? What can I bring? When a Shiva? Everyone is on board. Like the Jewish people in your community are supposed to be like an army of bubbies and moms taking care of you. That's their job. Actually, it's the fulfillment of the responsibility to comfort the bereaved. Okay, so shock from the moment of death until the funeral is completed. It's not to say that the rabbis then say, don't be in shock anymore. The lowering of a coffin at a funeral is meant to evoke the emotion that it does. It is the worst kind of thing you can see, and it is the most important part of the getting you from shock to grief or mourning. a rabbi's job and a funeral's job, or an officiant, it doesn't have to be a rabbi's job at a funeral, is to make you cry. Right? We learned in rabbinic school that a eulogy, not a good eulogy, bad eulogy, any eulogy is meant to praise the accomplishments of a person, number one, and number two, to make people cry, to say the words that they're not able to say, or raise the idea of how sad this is and enable people to cry. That's our mitzvah. That's what we're supposed to do. You will notice, and this is not meant to be judgmental at all. And sometimes when I preface things with this is not supposed to be judgmental, I know I'm being judgmental. This is not being judgmental, but it's going to sound like it. This is not, I repeat, not a celebration of life. That is not a Jewish idea. It's an American idea. It's a secular idea. It's a way of coping with aninut. Oh, we'll celebrate their life. No, it's a death. And this is a non-Talmudic verb. It sucks, or descriptor. It sucks. It is awful. It is the worst. It feels unnatural, even though we know intellectually it's natural. It's the worst thing ever. So don't feel like you need to call it a celebration of life. I give you permission not to call it a celebration of life. A year later, at the Yahrzeit, party it up if you want to do that after Yahrzeit. But no one in their right mind can grasp this concept of death, right? No one in their right mind. I'm not being sarcastic. No one can deal with it. So going to a place of saying, oh, we'll have a celebration of life that makes me feel better, makes total sense. Go back to the idea you're in shock, you don't know what you're deciding. You do what you do. So when people say to me in the office or at the intake when we're talking about the funeral, we want a celebration of life, I try to help them understand why that is not a Jewish concept. Why that is not, because Jews, like us or not, are really pragmatic, except for when we're not. Okay, so avelut and onan are terms for mourning or grieving. These are the statuses after the funeral is complete, after the casket has been lowered into the earth, and after we've said Kaddish. You are now an avel, or an onan. There are 7 immediate mourners. Okay, these are the people for whom you say Kaddish. Anyone outside of these people, you are not required to say Kaddish. I'll explain why in a minute. So, if it is your mother, father, your husband, wife, spouse, sister, brother, son, or daughter, God forbid, you are a mourner. If it is your uncle, you are not a mourner. If it's your cousin, who you're almost like siblings with, not a mourner. If it's your sister-in-law, brother-in-law, not a mourner. The mourners are the ones who wear the black ribbons or tear their garments, and then they have certain obligations. Now, let me tell you why. Let's say you're living in a village in the Pale of Settlement, where most of our ancestors came from, and you've got 17 cousins, 2 sets of grandparents, lots of siblings, right? They were fruitful and multiplied. The rabbis did not want us to be in Shiva and Shloshim, and then Shiva and Shloshim, and then a year, and then another one, and another one, and another one. If you include all of the, pragmatic, right? If you include all of those relatives, you would be permanently in Shiva. God forbid you lose 4 grandparents in 4 consecutive years. You can't have a wedding. I'm parent. If we included grandparents into this, or an uncle or an aunt, you couldn't have a wedding. Because you're not allowed to celebrate during, if you're a son or a daughter, during certain parts of mourning. You wouldn't be able to have a party. You wouldn't be able to go out dancing. You would not be able to do anything fun. If you had a family, let's say immediate family, including cousins and all that, of 30 or 40 or 28 or whatever, you wouldn't be able to do anything. It would just be forever mourning. So the rabbi said, no, here are the 7. And if you're one of these 7, you are obligated to certain things that we'll talk about, including saying Kaddish and all of these other things. And if you're not one of the 7, you're not obligated. That doesn't mean you shouldn't mourn. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be sad. The Reform movement did something very interesting. It said to everyone on Friday night, on Shabbat, Saturday morning, everyone can say Kaddish. Everyone can stand up. One urban myth, urban legend, is that it's for the Holocaust, right? There's 6 million who perished in the Holocaust. There are people who don't have anyone to say Kaddish for them. We take on the role. But in most, if not all, conservative and all Orthodox synagogues, only the mourners say Kaddish, because the most important part of Kaddish is the middle line and the amens, the parts that the whole community read. Those are the parts where the community is saying to the mourner, we're with you. When everyone's saying it, there's no particularism. There's no particular, I'm saying Kaddish, leave me alone to my Kaddish, and just give me the Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavarach Le'olam U'Me'amaya, like the middle part. Because that echo in the middle, or not echo, that response is our message to the mourners. The rabbis teach the most important thing that we can do as other congregants, to say we're with you in your time of grief. The Reform movement undid that. I think it was a mistake, but it's irreparable in that it would take us years to undo the tradition of everyone standing for Kaddish. So when I grew up, the only ones who stood up for Kaddish were the mourners. Yahrzeit, Shiva, Shloshim in the first year, who were in the 7, in the category of 7. Abby, you had a question. If you don't have any one of those 7, then there's no immediate mourner. Then the question I think you're really asking, who's going to say Kaddish for me? So I'm not going to get into it tonight. There's a category called a shaliach. A shaliach is a Hebrew word for an emissary. You can appoint someone before you die to say Kaddish for you, even if they're not a relative. They are not obligated, however, to not go to a wedding. They're not obligated to miss a joyous occasion, but you can ask them. Even today, you can go online if you want someone to say Kaddish for you. There are services that I gave a sermon on this actually a few years ago about kosher or not kosher. And it's an Orthodox, it's a halachic response or answer, which is yes, you can assign someone to say Kaddish for you. Now you should say to them, I'm going to tell you how to be really good Jews. You should say to them, and I will donate to your charity of your choice, $18, whatever it is. I need you to, and when you die, this is the person, so you can do all of that. It's totally kosher, it's totally legal. Here's my problem with it. Some people actually do it because they're lazy. In other words, I have to say Kaddish for my mom, I'm going to be on a cruise, so I can assign someone to do it for me, and then it's a little fuzzy, right? Not that you can't get a minyan, I guess depending on the cruise ship. Not that you can't get a minyan. What people do in our community, our minhag custom is, they call and they say, can you read the name next week or the week before? And there's lots of wiggle room with that too. So you can assign someone. That's the quick answer. Yeah. Right. Before you die. Yeah. We won't be here when that happens, right? So we don't know, but you ask them for, you could say to someone, this is true. The reincarnation thing is true. But the assignment is for, I'm not talking about a contractual obligation. You ask someone to do it, they're probably going to do it. And if you want to make sure every year that, fine. One of the reasons why we have memorial plaques and why we read so many names for the Kaddish list every week is because of that. They probably know my kids and my grandparents have Yahrzeit plaques up in 2 different synagogues in San Francisco, right? So I've got my parents up here, and when I'm long gone, their name will still be read. That, by the way, when you buy a plaque, when you donate a plaque, you're not buying it, you're donating a plaque. It's a whole tzedakah thing that's also involved in their souls ascending and all that. You are guaranteeing for as long as Congregation Beth Israel exists that their name will be read on the Shabbat of their Yahrzeit. So that's another out or in, depending on how you look at it. And so I always recommend buy the Tree of Life things because they're not going anywhere. And that will guarantee your name being read. We do have to go through, and we haven't in the 22 years I've been here, now comparing the lists to the plaques because the lists are getting so long. And those could be people who died 80, 90 years ago, have no surviving children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, anything here. And it's a fair question, or it's fair, This isn't a right or a wrong. It's a fair thing to say, okay, hopefully they're being mourned somewhere else, and we will ritualize that. But I would say probably my guess is about 80% of the names that we read have plaques. It's not about the purchase or the transaction. It's about, I'll get to it probably next week, because there is a buying off of souls that we do on Kol Nidre, and we'll talk about that next week. All right, next one, preparation for burial. You may have heard the phrase Kehilah Kedoshah. Oh, Steve, I'm sorry. Thank you. I thought I did that. I've been not mindful always. Thank you. Yeah, because you watched last week. So, Abby's question, by the way, was, what if I have no one in the group of 7 to say Kaddish for me? How do I handle that? Who's going to say Kaddish for me? Okay, good question. Kehilah Kedoshah. Kehilah Kedoshah, Chevra, society, community. There's lots of words for Chevra. Kedoshah, holy. So this is the holy society. They don't get capes. They don't get badges. These are the people who take care of the body. This is before Sinai Mortuary or mortuaries existed. Every Jewish community had to have a Kehilah Kedoshah, a burial society. Their job was to remove the body from the home or from the spot where the person died, to prepare it for burial in a very specific, 39-step process of preparing a body, washing the body, saying the prayers over the body, putting the shrouds on the body, so on and so forth. Let me read you a little Jewish law on this. Hold on. No, I'm not gonna. I don't have that. I thought I had it, but no, when we get to the rending of the garments, I have it. So they are in charge of preparation for burial. I also don't want to spend too much time on too many things, but we'll get to it in a second. They are responsible for preparation of burial. They take care of all of that and say the blessings. When my mom died, it was a Friday morning. I went to Sinai, I'd say 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had to ship her body to San Francisco, so the Kehilah Kedoshah had to be there. We have a problem in Phoenix, a small problem, which is our Kehilah Kedoshah is only run by Orthodox Jews. So Rabbi Keller at the time assigned members of the board of directors to sit with her body from that afternoon until the flight on Shabbat, which wasn't ideal, but it was what it was because the funeral was Sunday. So we had members of the board from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., because I didn't want someone who didn't know my mom or me sitting with her body. That is called shmirah, which means protecting or guarding. That's where the 2 candles are put at the head and the foot of the casket. The candles keep away all those spirits. We're going to talk about the Dybbuk next week, so don't worry about that. There are reasons for that. A lot of superstition of why we guard and protect bodies from death until burial. Then we flew on the same plane with her to San Francisco. The problem was, at 3 o'clock, this woman, I don't know her name, ran into Sinai, didn't know I was sitting there, and said to, what's his name, from Ray, we gotta go, I gotta hurry up, Shabbos is starting, right in front of me. And I said, you can leave. I'm not having one rush through getting my mom's body prepared, you can leave. And she left. And Cantor Spall and Terry Taubman came down and took care of the Kehilah Kedoshah services for my mom. With my dad, it was COVID, so there was really no choice. It was actually March 8th, and flight stopped the day after we came back from San Francisco for the funeral. So Kehilah Kedoshah is a very, very big mitzvah. Remember last week we talked about it's a great mitzvah because you're doing something for someone who cannot return the favor. Okay. Again, preparation, Kehilah Kedoshah should be an automatic in the community. It should be there already, so you don't have to worry about getting anyone together to do it. Tahara is, like I said, the ritual cleansing, and then the blessings for ritual preparation of a corpse. They are saying several blessings, which are really parts of the book of Psalms, while they are preparing a body. Now, why is that so important in Judaism? Why is it that we want to do all of this stuff? Prepare a body. And by the way, this is an optional program. In other words, not everyone does it. Why do we bury in shrouds? And it goes back to the idea of dust to dust, ashes to ashes. You came in this world with nothing, you leave this world with nothing, and symbolically, or not showing off, and therefore it is important when you're buried to be in a shroud, which has no hems on it, no fancy clothes. I remember my brother, what? No pockets, because you can't take any tzedakah with you. Right, it's not like when you go to Israel, here's the dollar, go give it to the guy. Nothing. You came with nothing, you leave with nothing. And so we're very kind of humble about the way we do this. My brother bought my mom a Prada purse once and said, I want the Prada in the casket. And I said, Mark, why don't you just put $1,000 in the grave too? Like, she's got granddaughters, not to be judgmental, but there's no reason to tempt anyone seriously to go looting the cemetery to go look for stuff. There's just no reason for that. So, unless it's a thing. But anyway, let's not make it a thing, my friends. All right. And I like the fact that we're very kind of au natural about it. It's a nice concept. You're born naked, you die with a shroud and a tallis. If you're a man. If you're a woman, you don't have to wear a tallis. So what happens at the funeral? Well, let's talk about so a grandchild will often come up to me or to Marty and say, I want to wear a black ribbon. Can I wear a black ribbon? If the question is, can I? You can do whatever you want, but you're not obligated to. In other words, it's the same rationale for a lot of things in Judaism. You can do it, but you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. No, I wouldn't say you're not fulfilling a mitzvah to a grandchild. But again, the rabbis didn't want us in permanent shiva. If it makes them feel good, better to wear it, go for it. I'm only therefore obligated to provide the ribbon or the tearing to the 7 immediate mourners. One who had lost the next of kin for whom he is required to observe mourning must perform the ceremony of tearing a rent in the clothes. The ceremony must be performed while standing. We're going to talk about standing in a second. If performed while sitting, the obligation is not fulfilled. You show respect for the dead. You stand. Get up, stand up, stand up straight. Think about what the rabbis are teaching us. Get for that 1 second, which is going to be, literally, you're tearing your heart. You're symbolically tearing your heart. This comes back from when King David lost. They actually wore sackcloth and ashes too, which we don't do, thank God. It is best to tear a rent in the clothes before the coffin is closed when one's sorrow is still intense. This is about emotions. For all of the next of kin, it suffices to tear a rent in the external clothes only a handbreadth, but for a father or a mother, all the clothes must be rent opposite the heart. So there's a tradition about where to put the ribbon. Some put it on the right, some put it on the left, but there's actually, we're not going to get into the specifics, there's actually a method for which side to put the ribbon. And it has to do with which person of the 7 you are mourning for. Children, I'll just give you one example, are, according to this, the most affected by the loss of a parent and a parent for a child. But the children put it over their heart because that is right over the spot. And the rest put it on the right. That's the prevailing custom. The next part is the 7 halts. We don't do this in the Reform movement, but there is when you walk from the funeral coach, we don't call it a hearse, we call it a funeral coach, from the funeral coach to the grave, now remember, in old-time community, if you're living in a village, you're walking from home to the cemetery. And later on, we're going to learn you're not allowed to walk back home in the same way that you walk to the cemetery. That you have to go to a living room learning on magic and Judaism and superstition, and you'll learn about that a little more. So, what do? We stop 7 times. I'm not going to go through it right now, but there is verses in Psalm 90, 89, somewhere in there, that we read a line, we stop. We read a line, we stop. We read a line, we stop. What you'll see me do, and probably Marty do, is we'll walk the coffin from the funeral coach to the graveside reading a psalm. Not necessarily one of those psalms specifically, because we're keeping the body company, okay, and the soul, because we want to make sure on the superstition side that the soul doesn't get kidnapped by a dybbuk, and on the traditional Jewish neuroses side, superstition side, would want to make sure that the soul is constantly being accompanied by the Psalms, because King David wrote the Psalms to ease his death. In other words, the rabbis teach that King David wrote the Psalms so that the angel of death would not come and take him. And if you're occupied in Torah study, the angel of death cannot get to you, so to speak. And angel of death is next week, and so on and so forth. Recitation of Psalms, I just talked about. Tziduk Hadin, for a good decree of judgment, so that Baruch atah Adonai le'mechalam dayan ha'emet blessing, praise you Adonai, ruler of the universe, who judges the righteous, has a very long prayer that in the Reform Manual, thank God, we've reduced a little bit, but to the highlights, but it's basically saying, God, forgive them and enable their soul to reach you in happiness and peace, and give them a good judgment. Please take care of them. That's the Tziduk Hadin. That is an essential part of the funeral. El Malei Rachamim, for the soul to transition to eternal life. You've heard that before. It can be chanted. It can be read. Everyone stands for that. That is the one that includes the may their soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. That's sort of the epitaph to the blessing. But we're asking God to protect their soul, to receive their soul in mercy, and to enable them to live in peace. And then Mourner's Kaddish, for the mourners and for the deceased. What does that mean? I'm saying the Kaddish myself because I'm a mourner, but I'm also saying Kaddish so that the soul, we talked about this a tiny bit last week, so that the soul will transition to the world to come fully and purely. And so it's both to take care of my need as a mourner and the idea that the rabbis created to take care of the soul's transition to the world to come. And that's why you say it for such a long time. Shiva applies to all 7 of the immediate mourners, the 7 days of mourning. The 30 days, which is the balance of 23 days after Shiva, applies to the 7 immediate mourners. Once you're done with Shloshim, if you are not the child, you go on with mourning for a full year, basically, 11 months. And then Yahrzeit at 1 year on the anniversary or the day of the death. Of the day of the death. Question. Yes, let's get a couple questions. You do. Yes. You do. If you're a brother or your sister, you're not obligated to do all the mourning for a year. If you're same reason as before with the constant mourning thing, so it was very specific that the children say Kaddish for the whole year. Yeah. Larry, question. Oh, the question was, well, the answer clarified it, I think, but the question was about, I do observe the year for a parent, whereas I don't for sibling, let's say. Yeah. Lori. Mm-hmm. I remember you told me this,
yes, it was so awful that I thought to myself, Jews really know what they're doing. That they do a shiva and have these people come, and it was beyond belief how horrible it was, and it really made me appreciate shiva so much more.
So we talked about this last week, death of a baby, stillborn, or nowadays, infant prenatal loss, which is to say they will deliver the baby not alive with Pitocin. And in the last 30 years, I would say it's more of a thing where actually moms are allowed to hold their baby, and it's awful. But what Lori's pointing out is that there's no funeral. We do have a section in our cemetery for babies, infants who are less than 30 days, but mostly for stillbirths. And I will do something ritually for the family, but it's the worst experience ever. Second worst experience ever. Okay, so yes. Okay, so there's a great question, Sherry. In the Reform movement, Or in a non-Orthodox sense, how long is Shiva? Well, since the word Shiva means 7, it's 7 days no matter what. In other words, I think the question under your question is, how long do we have people come over and do a minyan and say Kaddish and all of that stuff? You're in, I don't mean this flippantly, you are in Shiva for 7 days, whether you have bagels or deli every single night or every single morning. You're saying Kaddish 3 times a day for 7 days and up to 30 days, regardless. The minhag or custom, what I call minhag America, the minhag in our community, all the communities I've worked, is usually Reform Jews, from my experience, will do 3 nights. It just seems to be a thing. Or they'll do however many nights until the Friday night Shabbat, and then they'll come to services, and that'll be the end of it. It is exhausting. Shiva is exhausting. We're going to talk in a second about cues. You're going to like this very much, Lisa. Cues on when to get out of the way of the grieving person. There are actual cues as to when you leave them alone. Because we're overbearing, right? And we're Ashkenazic. I mean, Sephardic Jews, it's a whole other party. There is a cue on when you actually need to leave someone alone. Leave someone alone, because in traditional communities, you got people coming over 24/7 with food and stuff. And so 3 days seems to be kind of the thing. Covering the mirrors is optional, obviously. If you're Orthodox, you're going to cover the mirrors. Most conservative Jews will cover the mirror. And they'll say it's because of tradition, but it has to do with, not seeing yourself. There's no vanity allowed during mourning. All right, so you're allowed, it's a strong word, but you're not allowed to look at yourself and say, oh, I look like a schlub, right? Or whatever. The other, I got to go to the superstition part. When you see movies and a ghost appears in front of a mirror, they can't see themselves, so you want to keep them out. We don't want ghosts in our house during Shiva. Now, that's the Jewish superstition part. So you can do that stuff for 7 days. But you don't need to put the bowl of water out every day. That's just for the first day, to wash your hands, to ritually cleanse the cemetery off of your hands. Yeah. Okay. Let's do 2 more questions and move on. Patty. So babies they're not, okay, so it has to do with an idea called ensoulment. Ensoulment. When does the soul activate into a person? When does personhood begin? We talked about last week. I'm not going into abortion or any of that. The rabbis teach that a soul is not a person until at least 30 days. Okay, my instinct from what I've learned over the years is that had to do with infant mortality rates and the same concept of not wanting people to be in Shiva constantly. So if I'm in Shiva Shloshim as a parent, I have a stillbirth, and then I have another stillbirth, and then I have a miscarriage, and then I have another stillbirth, that's 4 years of Shiva Shloshim. Because, gestation's 10 months, but that's a long time. So there's, again, a pragmatic reason. And the rabbis teach that when a baby is born, even though it's breathing, it's come out of the birth canal and it's breathing, once it's in distress and it dies, the soul didn't actually get attached to the body. I guess that's not scientific or even spiritual, but the soul didn't activate. By the way, 90% of the time, the baby's born, it has a soul. At the bris, it's kind of a person, because we just gave it a name. It's really a soul. But I really think it had to do more with the pragmatic approach of not wanting a higher level of infant mortality rate to make moms and dads have to suffer and then sit Shiva and Shloshim, get pregnant again, have another miscarriage, another stillbirth, do it again. After 30 days, you get your insurance card. In the U.S., your baby gets their own insurance card. And I believe that's because Judaism set up the parameter of 30 days. In other words, I think it was inherited. Western civilization or the United States inherited that. A baby is under its mom's name until 30 days old, then it gets its own insurance number. And I think that is connected to Judaism, like everything is. And after that, they have personhood. Yeah. Now, having said that, everything I just said, there are exceptions to the rule. But but for the most part, and Marty will tell you the same thing, we have officiated at some ritual that we've created off the book, using the book, but off book for families, but there's nothing worse than doing that. You're not required a minion, you're not required anything for that. So how do I say it? It's not like you're off the hook, right? It's just saying, a rabbi once taught me, I didn't like this, and it was a very male thing to say, but I'm going to repeat it because there was some truth to it. But there has to be some difference between deep, deep, deep sadness and disappointment that you've lost a pregnancy and a death. There has to be, the rabbis wanted some heaviness to be removed from a family and from a mom specifically. Whereas the loss of a baby is tragic and disappointing and hard, but the rabbis almost thought, well, there is a possibility that you can get pregnant again, or you can adopt, or you can, whatever it is, which is not the same as a loved one dying. And I think that's okay. But again, I'm a guy. I've never gone through the gestational process. I remember watching Michelle go through it and being connected, but no one can experience what a mama-to-be experiences. So I'll cut it off there. 2 more questions, and then I got to move on to those. We won't get done, and then next week we're going to have to add a 4th week. Okay, go. Came back. So the story about Rabbi Plotkin of blessed memory's death is as follows, and now we're way off field, but I like telling the story because it's kind of funny, and if you knew Rabbi Plotkin, this will make total sense to you. He's at St. Joe's. He had a massive heart failure. He's in the cath lab. He's in the cath lab. The TV is much bigger than this. Rabbi Keller and I walk into the cath lab. Dr. Nathan Laufer says, I'm going to now remove life support. Now, of course, all the good Catholics at St. Joe's, all the nurses, all the doctors lower their heads. And we're like, why are they bowing their heads? Well, because they're Catholic, and that's what Catholics do. And we say the vidui, the confessional. And I swear to you, Rabbi Plotkin in his brain said, I am not allowing these young pisher rabbis to knock me out. And lo and behold, they turn the machine off, and Laufer's like, and he kept like looking at the screen and looking at him and looking at the screen and looking at him. I've never seen this before. His blood pressure is increasing. It was like 20/10. It's coming. I swear to God, he was going to have none of that. Me and the other young rabbi. I think what it was, and this has happened more often than not, and you can attest to this, Janice was in Oakland. I think she lives in Marin now, but she was living in Oakland, his daughter, and she was getting to the airport to get on a flight to get here, and he was waiting for her. Because after she got here, within 2 hours, he died. Ronnie and I were there like at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Janice got here, I think, at like 7 or 8, and he died at like 10. Yeah, that's Plotkin, baby. He was not having any of that. But that's a true story. How do I know? I was there. I can't remember what happened yesterday, but I can remember that story. Because Laufer's face, I will never forget looking up. What the hell is going on here? This is, when you take life support off, this isn't supposed to happen. And lo and behold, it did. I will say that the vidui, the time that you say the confessional prayer, needs to be timely, meaning it should be within a certain amount of time and we know from experience, when they're actively dying, we know from experience. But you also don't want to rush it. I have done viduis for people who didn't go anywhere, okay? We have members of the temple still alive, even though, because everyone told me that the doctor even said, this is going to happen, it's imminent. And I believe them when they say imminent. They're wrong too sometimes. It's only happened a couple of times. When Ronnie came to do vidui for my mom, my brother freaked out because oh no, she's going to live. No, not so much. And she died within a few hours of it, and I'm glad that Ronnie came when he came to do it. All right, let's go to, oh, wait, I missed one person. Yes, Michael. Yeah. Trump. Hypothetical on a holiday trumping Shiva. Right? Right? Great question. Great question. So let's say, God forbid, someone dies this Friday, or I'm sorry, their funeral is this Friday at 1 p.m. Okay? Shabbos and the holiday are starting at sunset, so let's round it off to 7 p.m., 8 p.m. You have to observe at least 1 hour of Shiva. Maybe it's 2 hours, something like that. So you go right home. You have the Shiva. Now your Shiva is only one meal that you have to provide with matzah, unfortunately. And that's it. That 1 hour counts. That's your Shiva. So yes, it's a great question. Do I have to do Shiva, or is there Shiva if the funeral date is just a few hours before the Yontif begins? And the answer is yes, at least for 1 hour. Sit in your home, sit on the stool, have a mincha service, say Kaddish, whatever, and then it's not go back to normal. It's just mourn without the standardized obligatory stuff that you have to do. Now, here's a great one for you. What happens when that happens? What happens with Shloshim? Let's say they died before Passover. So the first day of the holiday cancels out Shiva. The next Yontif day, now I'm automatically in Shloshim, so to speak, theoretically. This Friday night, Saturday, Yontif, cancels out Shloshim. So you have had basically 1 day and then a few days of 1 hour and then a few days of Shloshim, and then you're done with official mourning. I'm not getting into it tonight because it's so detailed. There is something called private mourning and something called public mourning. And that's the transition for the mourner, is they go from private to public, and then after 30 days, they go into another set of, get back to your normal routine of public mourning, but you still go and lay tefillin and say Kaddish and do all that stuff for the year. But that's a whole nother class. We could do a whole night on that. All right, let me go to this next thing. Comforting mourners, we talked about this before. What's expected of us? It's a great mitzvah. And then I'll get to your question in a second. All right, it's a great mitzvah. Following this discussion, this is in the Babylonian Talmud Tractate Brachot, another halacha, law, rule, that Rabbi Zerchia said, that Rabbi Ami said, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, this is how rabbis talk. I just did it. Rabbi Plotkin, Rabbi Keller, blah, blah, blah. This is very Jewish. This is the Talmud written 2,000 years ago, or forget about the math. Before the dead, one may speak only of matters relating to the dead, as speaking of other matters appears to be contemptuous of the deceased, underscoring that he is unable to talk, while those around him can. Therefore, one must remain fully engaged in matters relating to him or her. I love this. There's you may have heard this before. Has anyone ever heard that you're not, quote unquote, allowed to visit another grave when you're at a funeral? Not a cemetery, at a funeral. Have you ever heard of that? Well, of course you have. Of course. Why? Because all of your attention should be on the purpose of being there for the person that you are there to mourn. I love that. And everyone will go visit the graves anyway. I would always recommend wait until the service is done. Don't do it before and then run over once they start. What's it saying? It's saying our attention should be directed to the deceased. And I love this. As speaking of other matters, I don't know, that the Cardinals are going to be out of the playoffs by week 3 this year, appears to be contemptuous. It's disrespectful. He or she is unable to talk. They can't kibitz with you. So don't kibitz. I love it also because they're actually thinking the dead person has like a conscience. They want to be part of the conversation. They want to kibitz with you. Don't do that to them. They can't kibitz with you. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that sweet? I like that. I love this Jewish stuff. It's very good. Rabbi Yochanan said, now here's the cue. Here's the social cue for those of us who are not good with social cues. Okay, me. Rabbi Yochanan said, once a mourner nods his head to show that his grief has slightly diminished, this nodding your head means you're in agreement with something, you're actively in a conversation. It's a sign that they're talking to you. They're actually outside of their grief for that moment. The consoler may no longer sit next to him, as with his action, the mourner shows that he no longer desires their presence. It also can mean like that kind of nod, like get out of here. Rabbi Yochanan, this is also Babylonian Talmud, also said everyone is obligated to stand in the presence of a nasi, which is like a president or a governor or a prince. I put VIP. But a mourner is not, does not, except for a mourner and one who is sick. So if I'm sick, I don't have to stand up and greet a dignitary. I should have just put the word dignitary in there. Except for a mourner and one who is sick. Rabbi Yochanan said, to all who stand before a great person, one says, be seated, and only then may they sit down, right? There's a rule. When the president of the United States enters, there's a famous scene from West Wing. Remember? When President Bartell comes into the room and that lady's sitting down, he goes through the whole thing about like you should be taken out back and shot because you're not, you sit when the president says be seated. All right? So dignitaries in general, except for a mourner and one who is sick. They don't have to, they can sit. They can stay seated. Again, very pragmatic religion. And I like that very much because it teaches us that first part, know when. By the way, there's no magic words. First lesson I learned as a rabbi, 3 weeks in, a 10-year-old boy had his heart stop at camp and died. I went to Children's Hospital because some idiot put me on call for the community in my 3rd week of being a rabbi. And I ran down. Thank God Ray Zwerin was there, my boss. We went down together. He said, observe the following. There are no words that you're going to say or could be said that's going to make anything at all remotely better. Our job is to stand there and not say a word unless called upon. And you'll watch. They're going to come to you and fall apart in the whole, and he was exactly right. And it was, I had nightmares. I didn't sleep for weeks. It was awful. But because, it's like a 10-year-old. And this is before defibrillators. And now defibrillators. We have defibrillators in the building. We have one at camp. We have one in the preschool with infant paddles and pediatric paddles. But in 1995, we did not. And this kid was at some summer camp somewhere, and his heart stopped. It happens. He was born with a defect that no one knew about. The point is that there's no words. So if you're a comforter, zip it unless called upon. You can say, Hamakom yinachem etchem, may you be comforted or a version of that, among the mourners in Zion, Jerusalem. Can I get you something? But once you start explaining, well, my mom had pancreatic cancer, and yada, you have actually violated the whole purpose of comforting a grieving person. Don't explain it to them. It doesn't make them feel better. What makes them feel better is just being there. That's all you got to do. I mean, it's like the most special mitzvah is to comfort the grieving, and it's the easiest one because you have to bring food. But what's hard about that? You just show up. All you have to do is show up. But we get uncomfortable with it, right? So we have to start, and it's a normal thing, I get it, but Judaism says you don't have to do it. Let's get your question, please, and then Sam will get your question, and we'll move on, because we only have 15 minutes left. Maybe they just had. So the question was, someone died 2 days before Pesach, 48 hours. You got up there Thursday, obviously no Shiva. Funeral Friday. Oh, Thursday there was funeral. Thursday funeral. Thursday night Shiva with Minyan. Friday, nothing because it was the Chag. So the question was, on second day Yontif, why did they have a Minyan? Because they had a Minyan. Because the person still needed to say Kaddish. And the shul was probably closed for Mariv or the afternoon or whatever. So it wasn't an official Shiva. See, sometimes I think and cut me off if I'm not answering your question. Yep. Right. And they wanted to have one more to say Kaddish. Right. So let me define, and this goes to your question too, Sherry, I think. Shiva and Minyan are not synonyms. They're not the same thing. Shiva can end, but you're still obligated to say Kaddish. And I think you're exactly right. They wanted the daughter in Israel to be able to, in that community, say Kaddish because she had to anyway, because she's in the year. Right? You don't get, when I say it cancels Shiva, it's canceling private mourning. It's canceling the 7 days of mourning so that you can still celebrate. I know this is the wrong word, and I don't mean to be crass. So that you can celebrate Seder. Because you have to celebrate Seder. It is a law for all time for all Jews, and it matters that you're mourning, but it should not prevent you from celebrating the holiday. And so saying Dayenu, I know it's the last thing in the world you want to do, even though your loved one died 24 hours, 48 hours before. The tradition is saying you have to be able to do both. And in order to celebrate this Chag, which is a Oti Le'olam, a sign for all time, for all heaven and earth kind of stuff, you have to do that. So that's my guess is that's what happened. Sam, I think you're right. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, great. Oh, please. Yeah. Did you put any jewelry in the pockets? Yeah, I didn't think so, Sam. But, okay, now you actually bring up a really good question. What if someone says, like Sherry of blessed memory said, I want to be in pajamas or I want pockets, and she wanted pajamas, if I remember correctly. I want pockets so I can put my jewelry in it. Can I disrespect the desires of a person? If they say, this is what I want you to remember the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode? I want my 7-iron in the casket. Remember that? And Larry is like, no, it's my 7-iron. It's a whole, okay, that's your assignment for next week. Go on YouTube, Larry David Golf Club, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Watch the clip. It's hilarious, unless you don't like Larry David. But I have a kinship with him. And can I yes, you are actually allowed to fulfill a mitzvah. I hate to say this, but you're actually allowed to ignore your parents even. If your parents tell you, go out and drive on Shabbat, you're actually allowed to disrespect your parents and say, no, I will not fulfill a mitzvah because you told me. You're allowed to, okay. We're going to get to cremation a little bit next week because that's a biggie. They come in, they're crying. The person wants to be cremated, and they're like, Rabbi, I don't want to do that, and we're going to talk about that next week, okay? All right. So here we go. Where do I go? What is that world to come? Finally, we have arrived. It's not that we're done with the dead person, but we have fulfilled our obligations. We have prepared their body. We have observed the funeral. We have read the rites and the psalms and the whatever. Now, let's talk about them and where they're going, where their soul is going. There are more than 4 ideas, but I wanted to just point out these 4 real quick to you because I want to leave some time for questions. And I do have one more slide after this. Okay, let's go through the 4 real quick. Gan Eden, paradise. The Garden of Eden, paradise. It is not the same word as pardes. Pardes and paradise are 2 different words. Pardes means orchard, but you can call it that if you want to. Gan Eden is the one that's in the liturgy. The Garden of Eden represents perfect bliss. That's what it is. It's perfect bliss. Shamayim is another Hebrew word for heaven or the skies. They go up there. That's where we get the idea that they're up there somewhere. Shamayim. Sheol is kind of a biblical word. The rabbis don't really know what to do with it, so they sort of ignore it. Sheol comes up. I wrote this down. Fun fact, the word Sheol, it means netherworld. It's literally, I kind of joke, but I don't mean it as a joke. It's like you're buried and then there's like a trap door and you go under the grave. And in ancient Near Eastern literature, you remember like Hades in Greek literature? It's sort of like that. It's not good, it's not bad. The rabbis really don't know what to do with it. Should we make it a good place or a bad place? So they just sort of abandon it as an idea, but I'm teaching a class on this, so I have to teach you that it exists. Because we do get the question, Sheol. It appears in Torah 65 times. Jacob, when he knows he thinks Joseph is killed, says, I'm going to go down to Sheol with gray hair, right? It's sort of, in the Torah at least, it's like permanent netherworld Hades. Just, that's the description. Google it, and you can do all kinds of research on it, but just make sure you clear with me the stuff that sounds like Norishkeit, because it probably is. It also means hallowness. That makes sense, right? Mentioned 65. It's a realm of the dead. And again, when it gets to the rabbinic period, the rabbis play around with it. There's no dogma or halacha or anything about it. It never takes on the status of a thing. But it exists in the tradition, so you need to know that. That's the problem with the 4,000-year-old traditions. There's stuff out there we don't know about. We've heard about it. There's your explanation. Gehinom is a little bit different. There is actually a place in Israel near Jerusalem called the Gehinom, the Valley of Gehinom. It's hot, arid, dry, yuck. And it's believed that the souls of those who are on the eviler side go to this Valley of Gehinom. You can look at it. It's in the story of King Saul, I believe. But really, what is Gehinom? It is what I call the version of hell that exists in Judaism, or the idea of hell in Judaism. It also does not take on any permanent, dogmatic Jewish thing that we worry about. It never took on. It was really a Christian idea, hell. And it's not eternal in its nature. There are 7 levels to this place. And the idea of, that's why I said it's hell kinda, right? So for example, it's not biblical. The word Gehinom or Gehenna, you may have in Yiddish heard the word Gehenna come up sometimes. It's not really biblical. It's I said last week, it's like where the really bad blasphemers go. What establishes, the criteria to go to hell in Judaism? Blaspheming, not accepting the idea of the resurrection of the dead, and violating Shabbat. It's not even the big sins, like murder and rape and kidnapping, which are given in the only times in Judaism. That was a really bad sentence. In Judaism, there are only a few crimes for which you can apply the death penalty. And it's not blasphemy, yes, but not violating Shabbat. In the Torah it is, but the rabbis clean that up later. Jewish law is not into the death penalty. It's just not a thing for us in the Talmud. Well, let's just say they used a lot of layers before you could actually apply it. The rebels against Korach, the rabbis taught, they went to Gehinom. There are 7 levels to heaven. There are also 7 levels to Gehinom. The first 6 levels are for what we would call misdemeanor crimes. It's a place for this Gehinom is a place for the soul to get purified and cleansed. It's sort of purgatory for Jews. That's the furthest you can go. It's, again, hard to take a Christian concept and apply it over here to Judaism because it doesn't work for us that way. But it's a place where your soul even has the opportunity of repurposing, if you will. But there is a 7th level of Gehinom, which are for the most wicked, that they stay there permanently. Yes, it would be in the middle part. The 6 places would be in the middle part, whether you call it the Gehinom purification cycle. And remember, there's no time and space, so we don't. One of the reasons, by the way, just to throw this in there, that we say Kaddish for the full year is to get them out of there. just in case. So we are actively involved in getting their souls up to one of the 7 levels of heaven, because there's also it has to be 7 everywhere. But that's exactly right, Trey. That's exactly right. All right, one more slide, and then we're gone. I know we're going fast. Okay, God of mercy and judgment, oi. Last week I told you, Yom Kippur is a rehearsal for death. So here's what happens in the actual judgment. Now, there are millions of texts on God as merciful. God sitting literally on the high holidays. We're supposed to have an image of God when we're praying in a throne, on the throne of mercy and on the throne of judgment. God is a judge and God is kind. I love this text. Of the hundreds I could have chosen as to what this judgment process looks like or feels like. Rabbi Elazar Kapoor, this is from Pirkei Avot, used to say, those who are born will die. You know, the rabbis, they don't need to waste, like I do, lots of words to explain it. Those who are born will die. Those who will die will live again next week. Those who then live are to be judged, to know, to make known, and to let it be known who is God, who is the creator, who is the one who understands, who is the judge, who is the witness, who is the litigant. This sounds very familiar if you pay attention to the Yom Kippur liturgy. When we read that God is both arbiter in the Yotana Tokef, God is judge and arbiter and counsel and litigator. The Holy One of Blessing is the one who will judge, only God. This is attached to 2 concepts that we'll talk about next week. One is messianism, that's for next week. And the other one is secrets. God knows. My grandma knew. Minnie Margulis knew. She was this tall, and she knew. She took one look, and if you were lying, she knew. If you were having a bad day, she knew. She had witch-like. The Holy One of Blessing is the only one who will judge, a judge without iniquity, without forgetfulness. God does not forget anything, sorry. Without partiality, without being bribed. God is beyond, above, all of that. Know that everything will be added up. Now we go to the scales of justice. So when we think of Lady Justice with the blindfold, that's God on God is that on steroids. God has a blindfold and scales. This is the definition of true justice, right? Knows everything will be added up. You have one side is your sins, and the other side is your deficits, sins, whatever, and the other side is your mitzvahs. Don't let your inclination, your Yetzer Hara, persuade you that you will be able to escape the grave. Oh, I'll settle up with God later. I'll be a lawyer, and I will argue my case to God, and God will laugh in your face if you do that. For against your against your will were you formed. I like this. Against your will, you live. Against your will, you will die. Against your will will make reckoning before the ruler of rulers, the Holy One of Blessing. What does that mean, against your will, against your will, against your will? It means you don't have a flipping choice in any of these things. These are God. Remember, I've talked about this before. That's God's domain. And when you start to go into God's domain, you better be prepared to get smacked down. Because God's domain is holy. It's like my grandma. You can't get away with it. And it's not a free will. What does that mean? It's not about I have free will and I make choices. That, yes, you have free will. But in that domain, it is what it is. And I like it because it's like that idea of justice is blind, right? You're judged based on your actions. There is no talking yourself out of it. There is no, I can't be accountable. It's no, that's that person's fault. None of that. This keeps us honest, by the way. This is one of the fundamental theologies of Judaism that, knowingly or not, you live in. That's why people show up on Yom Kippur, because of this. Because even if they don't think that they believe this, even if they come just because it's tradition in the community, they are unconsciously, because it's in their DNA, doing this. just in case. Just in case. You might as well just say it, right? Couldn't wait to show up on Yom Kippur, do a little fasty fast, and, then go out to the parking lot and flip the bird and honk at people. Yes, Sharon. Is this predetermination? No. No. It is set permanently. Your choices are not predetermined. They're not. That's why it says, don't go to your evil spirit or your Yetzer Hara and think, I can talk my way out of this. What you do, this is how I believe it and explain it. You're born, you come into this world. Now, this is easy for us to say. We live very, very, very good lives. We're not born in the underbelly of Mumbai, okay? Living in a place with no running water. We're very lucky. Having said all of that, we are given choices. Choose this. Remember, go back to Yom Kippur. Choose life or choose death. Choose what you're going to do. God created your hand. Here's your hand. It's a nice thing. God created it. You want to grab a gun and shoot someone? Your choice. You want to use it to give someone love? Your choice. You want to use it to do something? Now we're talking more metaphorically. Your choice. That's not predetermined. That's the only way I can explain it is when you have a kid, you want the kid to have a painless life. That is what we all want. But sometimes our kids make mistakes and screw up and do things that cause us tsuris and them tsuris. And that's not because we wanted that to happen. That's because they chose to do that. So the area of this is more about consequence. So you go to heaven. Scales are heavily in favor of one way or the other. What if they're in the middle? That's where reincarnation comes in. That's where we're going to start next week. And Messianism as well. At the end of time, this is what I'll leave you with. When the Messiah comes, all disputes will be settled. In other words, in the Talmud, they have lots of arguments that end in teku. The word is teku, tie. They have a tie settlement. The majority doesn't win, the minority doesn't win. Those will be settled when the Messiah comes. We will have the definitive answer about what to do with whatever law it is that the rabbis couldn't agree to an answer to. And we're living in times now, and I think about AI a lot when it comes to this, where we're going to start seeing more messy moral and ethical questions being raised because of, not because of the AI, but because at some point when we don't have the emergency stop button, I don't think the computers are going to take over any of that stuff. But what do I know? We're going to have some moral and ethical questions about free will and stuff like that later, and it's going to be like the unmessianic era. But God's cool with that. I mean, if you guys want to make choices to destroy yourselves, go for it. That is not God's intention and not what God wants from us. So this keeps us honest. One last question before we go, because it's now, I'm very respectful of time. Yes, last question. Yes. Let's go back. Yep. So is that where is it decided? Where is it decided, the whole thing of the balance of justice? Like, okay, so you go to court, there are judges, right? Judges make decisions. It can go up to the appellate process and go to Supreme Court. And then once they decide, I'm not going there, so don't even start with me. Once the Supreme Court decides, that's it. Unless a law is passed to change their ruling, right? God is the Chief Justice of the Chief Justice of the Chief Justice. When you're in here, let's call it the middle area. I don't even want to give it a name. When you're in between life and judgment and final decree, let's call it, all kinds of things are possible. We have an active role in that by saying Kaddish to theoretically help the soul transcend this place and to go ascend. But to answer the specific question, yes, you are in between. You're neither here nor there in the judgment process. And according to the rabbis, going back to that whole mourning thing, it can take up to a year, our time. Remember last week I said there's no time, there's no space in the afterlife. There's no time or space the way that we account for it. And so therefore the rabbis they felt the need to assign a time frame to it, and they assigned this purgatory time to a year, 11 months to 12 months, somewhere in there. Why 11? Why 12? Because Jewish years are weird. We have leap years where we add a whole month, so it's just sort of, they round it up, I think. 11 months, 12 months, something in there. But at some point at Yahrzeit, you're off the hook for accountability for the soul making its transition. Did that answer the question, I hope? Ish? Ish. When is it decided is when the scales, when the judgment is made. You still have a chance. That's why I told everyone to watch the Albert Brooks movie, because, if you've got a good lawyer in the afterlife, you can get out of Judgment City and go on the tram to, you obviously didn't see the movie? Okay, really category and category, what's that? Oh. Right, just like the movie. Right. So what my gut tells me, if you're a bad person, there's none of this stuff. And yeah, I think so. But you still have this opportunity in the 6 levels of Gehinnom. If you abide by, again, this never became dogma in Judaism. So when someone says there is no hell in Judaism, they're right and they're wrong. They're right insofar as, yes, there is no status or place called hell. The rabbis kind of gave up on it. Having said that, like any good Jew, they still talked about it and obsessed on it and gave it 7 levels and gave us statuses for when you're in the first 6 as opposed to, they still did that. And I know this is so hard for us to understand because I just want a black and white answer, Rabbi Kahn. But the truth is, it's not binary like that. It exists, but it's not a thing, if that makes sense. I'm just going to use the vernacular. It exists, but it's not a thing. Why do I say that? Because for Christians, for many Christians, not all Christians, for most Christians, it is a thing. And that's the difference. Hell. Heaven is definitely a thing for Jews. Right. Heaven and the food part of Shiva. Those are no. Okay, I said only that was the last question, but now you get the last question. And then I'll answer yours after. It doesn't matter. What if a person who ends up in Gehinnom thinks, I shouldn't be here? You got the wrong guy. Go back to the last slide. Patty, I'm so glad that you asked this because it helps to explain the text. Look, 2nd paragraph. God is the one, the Holy One of Blessing, is the one who will judge. A judge without iniquity, without forgetfulness, without partiality. In other words, you have there is no further here and talk about resurrection, reincarnation. We'll talk a little bit about some other issues like cremation and some of the other superstition stuff. I'm sorry, the week after. When is it? No, it's next week. Oh, look at the thing. I'll know by Friday night. Okay, thank you.